안녕하세요. 45일차 예습낭독을 하도록 하겠습니다. 읽고 있는 책은 Roald Dahl, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory 조금씩 읽고 있고요. 매일매일 낭독을 하는데요. 내일 45일차 10월 4일 부분 읽고 가겠습니다. 네. 자, 여기부터 여기부터 alright 여기부터 가 아니네요. 네, at this point 여기부터 읽으면 되겠습니다. At this point, Mr. Salt, Veruca's father, stepped forward. Very well, Wonka, he said importantly, taking out a wallet full of money. How much you'd want for one of these crazy squirrels? Name your price. They're not for sale, Mr. Wonka answered. She cannot have one. Who says I can't? Shouted Veruca. I'm going in to grab me a squirrel this very minute. Don't, said Mr. Wonka quickly, but he was too late. The girl had already thrown open the door and rushed in. The moment she entered the room, 100 squirrels stopped what they were doing and turned their heads and stared at her with small, black, beady eyes. Veruca Salt stopped also and stared back at them. Then her gaze fell upon a pretty little squirrel sitting nearest to her at the end of the table. The squirrel was holding a walnut in its paws. All right, Veruca said, I'll have you. She reached out her hands to grab the squirrel, but as she did so, in that first split second when her hand started to go forward, there was a sudden flash of movement in the room, like a flash of brown lightning, and every single squirrel around the table took a flying leap towards her and landed on her body. 25 of them caught hold of her right arm and pinned it down. 25 more caught hold of her left arm and pinned that down. 25 caught hold of her right leg and anchored it to the ground. 24 caught hold of her left leg. And the one remaining squirrel, obviously the leader of them all, climbed up on to her shoulder and started tapping the wretched girl's head with its knuckles. Save her, screamed Mrs. Salt. Veruca, come back. What are they doing to her? They're testing her to see if she's a bad nut, said Mr. Wonka. You watch. Veruca struggled furiously, but the squirrels held her tight and she couldn't move. The squirrel on her shoulder went tapping the side of her head with his knuckles. Then all at once the squirrels pulled Veruca to the ground and started carrying her across the floor. My goodness, she's a bad nut after all, said Mr. Wonka. Her head must have sounded quite hollow. Veruca kicked and screamed, but it was no use. The tiny strong paws held her tightly and she couldn't escape. Where are they taking her? Shrieked Mrs. Salt. She's going where all the other bad nuts go, said Mr. Willy Wonka. Down the garbage chute. By golly, she is going down the chute, said Mr. Salt, staring through the glass door at his daughter. Then save her, cried Mrs. Salt. Mrs. Salt. Too late, said Mr. Wonka. She's gone. And indeed she had. But where? Shrieked Mrs. Salt, flapping her arms. What happens to the bad nuts? Where does the chute go to? That particular chute, Mr. Wonka told her, runs directly into the great big main garbage pipe which carries away all the rubbish from every part of the factory. all the floors sweeping and potato peelings and rotten cabbages and fish heads and stuff like that. Who eats fish and cabbage and potatoes in this factory? I'd like to know, said Mike TV. I do, of course, answered Mr. Wonka. You don't think I live on cacao beans, do you? But, shrieked Mrs. Salt, where does the great big pipe go to in the end? Why, to the furnace, of course, Mr. Wonka said calmly. To the incinerator. Mrs. Salt opened. 여기까지네요. To the incinerator. 네, 여기까지입니다. 네, 첫 번 읽어봤고요. 몇 가지 좀 어려운 단어가 있었는데 제가 아까 wretched 이 단어를 잘 몰랐던 것 같아요. 어디 있는지 한참 돌아가 봐야 될 것 같아서요. 그럼 또 내일 만나서 해보도록 할게요. 감사합니다. 내일 만나요.